सुनी मैं हरि आवन की आवाज़, सुनी मैं हरि आवन की आवाज़। महल चढ़ी चढ़ी जो मोरी सजनी, महल चढ़ी चढ़ी जो मोरी सजनी, कब आवे महाराज। सुनी मैं हरि आवन की आवाज़। तुम मेरी राखो लाज हरि, तुम मेरी राखो लाज हरि। तुम जानत सब अंतर जामी, तुम जानत सब अंतर जामी, करनी कछु न करी। तुम मेरी राखो लाज हरि, तुम मेरी राखो लाज हरि। दारा सुत धन मोह लिए हैं, दारा सुत धन मोह लिए हैं, सुधि बुद्धि सब बिसरी। सूरपतित को मेघ उधारो, सूरपतित को मेघ उधारो, अब मेरी नाव भरी। तुम मेरी राखो लाज हरि, तुम मेरी राखो लाज हरि, तुम मेरी राखो लाज हरि। मैं तो सावरे रंग राजी, मैं तो सावरे रंग राजी। साज सिंगार बांधी पग घूंघरू, साज सिंगार बांधी पग घूंघरू, लोक लाज तजी नाची। मैं तो सावरे रंग राजी, गई कुमति लई साधु की संगति, गई कुमति लई साधु की संगति, भगत रूप भई साची। गाय गाय हरि के गुण निस दिन, काल व्याल सो बाची। मैं तो सावरे रंग राजी, मैं तो सावरे रंग राजी। उन बिन सब जग खारो लागत, उन बिन सब जग खारो लागत। और बात सबका गोविंद मेरो है, गोपाल मेरो है, गोविंद मेरो है, गोपाल मेरो है, श्री बाके बिहारी नंदलाल मेरो है, श्री बाके बिहारी नंदलाल मेरो है, गोविंद मेरो है, गोपाल मेरो है, श्री कृष्ण गोविंद हरे मुरारी, हे नाथ नारायण वासुदेव, श्री कृष्ण गोविंद हरे मुरारी, हे नाथ नारायण वासुदेव, पितुमात स्वामी सखा हमारे, पितुमात स्वामी सखा हमारे, हे नाथ नारायण वासुदेव, श्री कृष्ण गोविंद हरे मुरारी, हे नाथ नारायण वासुदेव, श्री कृष्ण गोविंद हरे मुरारी, हे नाथ नारायण वासुदेव, हे नाथ नारायण वासुदेव, हे नाथ नारायण वासुदेव.
Namaste, my dear brothers and sisters, boys and girls. The devotional song that you heard just now in Vasudhara's melodious voice was a Meera bhajan. Meera was one of the ardent devotees of Krishna, which is something not uncommon. But what is uncommon is the relationship that she had with Krishna as a devotee. The legend goes that as a child, once she saw a marriage procession and asked her mother, when will I get married, to whom will I get married, and so on. And her mother told her in jest that your spouse is Krishna, you will get married to Krishna. And she took it so seriously that she started treating Krishna as her partner, and naturally, that was not something very acceptable to the society. She was formally married to somebody else, but could never give herself to that man. The man understood, but the society in general didn't. So, in this particular song, she is telling Krishna that you know my devotion to you is total, and in your absence I feel lonely. It's without you that I can't live. And that it's without you that I can't live, and it's for you that I dress up well, and that is what brings life to me. Without you, life is totally tasteless, insipid, uninteresting, and therefore does not seem to be of any value to me. And since you understand all this, and you have no problem in my being devoted to you in this fashion, you are the only one who can also save me from the embarrassment which the society is causing me. So this is what she is saying, the devotee is saying in this song, the devotee Meera, to Lord Krishna, to whom she is devoted, but treats him as a partner. This is something quite acceptable in the Hindu tradition, because the human being is a manifestation of the divine, that the divine itself in another form. And therefore, it is not that the divine can have only one place, one stature as the ruler and the master. But in addition to that, there can be other types of relationships also with the divine, because the divine and we are fundamentally one, although we are highly imperfect forms of the same. And that relationship could be not only that of the type of relationship between the king or the ruler and or the master and the subjects or the disciples. The relationship can also be that between, as it is between two friends, or between a child and a parent, and in occasional cases, as in case of Meera, it has also been as if it's the relationship between partners, and that has also been an acceptable way of getting devoted to the divine. Now, today we are entering that phase when this course is about to come to an end. We have another few days to go, but now we can start thinking of the end, and therefore I'll say a few things in relation to that. All is well that begins well, and all is well that ends well. Well begun is half done, and all is well that ends well. I think we began well. We are ending also more or less well, but not too well. As you have so noticed that in the last few days our YouTube channel has not been available, and the email address that we had been giving sa150yes@gmail.com, that doesn't work anymore. And this has been due to a mishap. We tried sending all of you means not only those who are regularly there in the classes, but all those who had registered, a feedback form to find out how you had found the course so far, and the number of mails sent in that process was about 750. And we didn't know that this is something which cannot be done on a Gmail account, but the policies that Gmail has led to the sort of this mishap. They deleted sort of or terminated our email and YouTube account. So that's why this mishap happened. However, there's always a way out, and we are trying to repair it and do it in ways that are acceptable, because there are acceptable platforms we discovered by which that large number of mails can be sent. But it will take a little time, and therefore this communication gap between you and us. But then we are giving you alternative emails, my work email as well as Aditi's mail, and we'll share with you some more emails which you can use before the course ends. So my email is relatively easy to remember. Of course, Aditi is also not very difficult, but it is rambigework@gmail.com. RAM for Ramesh, BIJ for Bijlani. So that makes it Rambij, and then followed by work to indicate that I hardly work. So rambigework@gmail.com. So that email you can always use, and we can stay in touch. Now about a few other things. Firstly, why did we start this at all? And of course, this is the end of this module, but these courses will continue for quite some time to come, and we'll have different modules in which we expect not only you but many more also to join. And for that, again, we'll depend upon you, because the best publicity is through the word of mouth. And therefore, if you have liked the course and you make it a point to tell at least 5 more friends of yours who may be interested in such a thing, we are sure to have a much larger number. So please, one favor that you can do to us is that each of you try to tell at least 5 more persons who are interested in the topic that this is a course which you liked, and therefore even if you did not join this module, join the next one. And so far as this module is concerned, you can always see whatever happened through the class recordings, which will once again be there on YouTube. We'll share the link of the new YouTube channel with you. So please tell at least 5 more about the course if you liked it. Another thing is that the courses are all free, but all the same it does cost some money, and therefore you are welcome to make any voluntary donation to Sri Aurobindo Ashram Delhi branch. And if you would like to do that, then even small amounts are welcome. So if you would like to do that, then again you can send on the email addresses that we are giving you, and we'll send you the details of the bank account to which you can directly transfer the amount. Between this module and the next module, Yes.02, which will start on the 7th of April, we are starting another activity which I might say Yes Boosters. You know, the word booster has become very common now after the COVID crisis. And so you would understand that if we treat this Yes.01 as a sort of the vaccine, then it also needs a booster. And these boosters will be generally in the form of talks once a week on Fridays. So Friday talks is what will follow this, and that will continue even when the next module starts. So this will become a year-round activity, a Friday evening talk. Sometimes instead of a talk, there may be a session of devotional music, because music again can be a good booster. So we can talk in different, sometimes it may be a panel discussion rather than a straight talk, but some activity every Friday will become a regular feature, and that we can call sort of under one blanket term of Yes Boosters. They will continue. The next module, Yes.02, will start on the 7th of April, and in that there will be 4 classes a week, Monday through Thursday, because Friday will be this Yes Booster that will continue. So Monday through Thursday, and out of these 4 days a week, 2 of the classes will be on theory, 2 on practical, and the practical classes will try to now take you towards becoming yoga teachers. The theory sessions in Yes.02 will be all on nutrition. Nutrition, the way modern science looks at it, and nutrition, the way ancient disciplines, particularly Ayurveda, the way these disciplines have looked at it. And one can find that if one tries, one can always reconcile the two. The two become complementary. What is not available in one system is available in another system, and by looking at both, we can arrive at a better sort of knowledge about what we should eat, how much we should eat, and how we should eat. So both all these aspects, what to eat, how much to eat, and how to eat, all this becomes much more clear to us if we try to understand it in terms of not only modern science but also in terms of ancient Indian wisdom, particularly Ayurveda. So this is how we'll continue in Yes.02. Now coming to today's topic. Today the topic is integral education. Now it may look a bit out of place. Why in a course on yoga we are talking about education? In fact, if you look at education properly, you would find that there is a lot in common. So much in common that in our tagline you might have seen the first sentence is yoga is education. No, yoga, education and spirituality, that is our overall sort of title. But then within that, the first sentence in the tagline, yoga is education. Why? Because if you really come to think of it, both yoga and education are about better performance of our instruments, the body and the mind. Yoga one can start at any stage, at any age, and there's always scope for improvement, so one can try to improve the performance of the body and the mind, for which techniques are available in yoga. In school, we try to do the same with the children. We try to improve the performance of their body and mind. So we are doing, in both cases, we are trying to improve the performance of the body and the mind. While that is necessary in both cases, it is not sufficient. That also we have seen why it is not sufficient, and if I may be a little repetitive, it's not sufficient because improving the performance of the body and the mind would help us do whatever type of work we do as a teacher, as a manager, as a scientist, but then it would also improve the chances of a terrorist becoming more successful, because a terrorist who is physically weak, emotionally unstable and intellectually dull will not be able to launch a successful terrorist attack. So after learning the techniques of yoga, or as a result of going to a good school and getting educated there, in either case, if this person's body and mind now function better, he will become a more successful terrorist. So neither yoga will qualify as a spiritual discipline, nor will a system of education be considered a satisfactory system of education if it helps a teacher as much as it helps a terrorist. So in both cases, while the improvement of the performance of the instruments, the body and the mind, is essential and desirable, it is not sufficient. It is necessary but not sufficient. And we have to bring another element in. And the other element that we have to bring in, the best element that we can bring in, is once again the soul, which means that we end up addressing or taking into account the totality of the person, which is the body, mind and the soul. And therefore there's hardly any difference between the two. Just as yoga cannot qualify as a spiritual discipline unless we take into account the soul, because that is where we get the guidance for using the body and the mind, similarly a system of education cannot be considered a system which prepares a child for life, because life well lived has to be in terms of the yogic principles, in terms of spiritual principles, because that is what helps us address the purpose of life. So a system of education which stops at educating the body and the mind may prepare a person for making a living, but this will not prepare the person for living a good and meaningful life. And that's why the two are in fact closely related, and it is with this background and the background of whatever we have done in the last few weeks that we will look at education today. The love and blessings of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo to all of you from Sri Aurobindo Ashram Delhi branch, and my pranams to the Gurus. The YES program is a part of the 150th birth anniversary of Sri Aurobindo and the 75th anniversary of India's independence. So we'll now get introduced to integral education, the system of education worked out by Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. Now let's try and see how yoga and education are very similar to each other. Both of them are about improving the performance of the body and the mind. While that is necessary, it is not sufficient. How the body and the mind are used is important. So the yoga and education are in that way exactly the same. Just two different contexts in which we are using these words, but otherwise the two are so similar. And because educating or improving the performance of the body and the mind is not sufficient, yoga, properly speaking, should also have guidance on how the body and the mind are used, and it does have that, and that guidance is based on a spiritual philosophy, and that is what makes yoga a spiritual discipline. In the same way, incorporating guidance on how the body and the mind should be used is also a part of education, and that is what makes in fact education complete. Education will remain incomplete unless there is also guidance which the child gets on how to use the body and the mind. Now the best guidance for how we should use the body and the mind comes from the soul, and if it comes from the soul in case of yoga, there is no reason why it should come from another source in education. And if yoga has to be a spiritual discipline, then yoga cannot neglect the soul. And in the same way, education also cannot neglect the soul, unless education also cannot neglect the soul, and that is what would make education complete. Therefore, yoga in its comprehensive view takes into account all parts of the being, that is the body, mind and the soul or the spirit, and education also becomes complete only when it takes into account all parts of the being. So yoga is education. And the system of education that is based on these principles is integral education. Integral means total or complete. So the system of education that takes into account the totality of the being is integral education. And the totality of the person is not just the body and the mind which is on the surface, and the mind having these two aspects, the emotional part of the being or the vital, and the intellect or the mental. But besides that, we have behind it And as a more fundamental and lasting reality of the surface instruments, we have the soul, and the soul has a dynamic aspect which plays a role in our everyday life, and that is the psychic being. So in integral education, what we do is we educate, of course, the body or the physical part of the being, the vital or the emotional part of the being, and the mental or the intellectual part of the being, but in such a way that these instruments work in light of the guidance coming from the psychic being. Or a better way to look at it would be that the psychic being, in fact, is at the center. It is the pivot around which the education of the body and the mind revolve. So the education of the body and the mind should be such that while getting educated in school, the child also learns that these instruments have to be used for doing something which comes from somewhere deep within, so that guidance available from within the child should become more aware of. The child is in fact already very open to it and aware of this, but the child may not look at it that way. So this is just sort of a reinforcement rather than telling the child something that the child doesn't know. You might recollect that some time back we had seen how a schoolgirl, she knew what not to do, but yet she did it because it was tempting. But then she discovered that if she picks up something that doesn't belong to her, she continues to feel uneasy. So, that is what the system does. And we'll come to that a little in greater detail, but let's first see how the education of the instruments is also different in integral education as compared to what may happen in some of the more conventional schools. In integral education, the body is educated. There is the education of the physical part of the being is important, but it is not just about some games and sports which will make the body stronger or person physically more fit. It is also about making the movements gentle, graceful, and above all, conscious. And that is something which you can easily understand, because that is what happens in yoga also. And why that is important is because that is what not only builds up that or strengthens that link between the body and the mind, so that this type of education of the body cures the body of its usual restlessness, and that in turn facilitates the absence of the unnecessary chaotic activity in the mind. So the body and the mind are closely related. If we can make the bodily movements conscious and gentle and graceful, and thereby reduce or eliminate the restlessness of the body, that will help us also reduce the restlessness of the mind, because the two are linked through the prana. So this higher principle that is higher than the body, will be able to flow more freely through the body, make it healthier, and will also prepare the mental part of the being or the mind for being able to channelize those realms of consciousness which are normally not accessible to the mind. So all that will be possible only if the physical education is done in such a way that it allows that prana to do its job better, both in the body and the mind. A book based on these principles, giving some minor games, has been prepared here, and the book is called Easy to Play Minor Games. Then education of the vital or the emotional part of the being. In fact, if we think about emotions, one thing that is common to emotions is that they make us feel good or bad without necessarily there being a reason for it. Emotions, you see, go beyond reason. I'm saying something. If the same thing is said to the accompaniment of music, you will like it much better. What is being said is exactly the same, but when you listen it listen to it in the form of a poetic expression, which then has been further composed into a tune, and then you have some music going with it, and somebody with a melodious voice sings it, you like the same thing much better. Or to take a more ordinary example, suppose there's a room with bare walls. It will serve the same purpose as any other room, as the same room would if you were to put a few pictures or some thing in the room. So why do we put those pictures in the room? It feels good. It doesn't improve in any way the utility of the room. The room would still serve the same purpose, but we feel better. Which means that what the child should pick up in education is also that there is something which can make us feel good or bad without necessarily there being a reason for it, without necessarily there being a utilitarian reason for it, without necessarily being there a reason for leading to a concrete profit to us. So there is no concrete profit or loss involved. There is no change in the utility involved. There is no clear-cut reason that can be given, and yet there are things which can make us feel good or bad. This is important because we all want to feel good. And sometimes the tendency, particularly in the modern world where the tendency is to be utilitarian, the tendency is to feel that if something is of no use, then why go for it? Why spend time and energy on it? And avoid those things which will lead to either which will have no utility or which may lead to a concrete loss. Now, if we are all the time thinking about profit and loss in terms of things which can be measured, be it money or be it time, then not much good can be done in the world. We have seen that through several examples. For example, if a person gives away money in charity, he's losing money, and yet he feels good. So that's the paradox, which means that we can feel good in spite of incurring a financial loss. Or a person takes a person who is injured in a road accident. This person takes the person to the hospital. Now the person loses time. The person still feels good. So the person feels good in spite of losing time, which means that there are activities in which we may lose something concrete, measurable, and yet feel good. And these are things which, how does the child pick up? The child picks up these things in school through activities such as drawing, music, dance, theatre, or drama. Now these are the type of things which again have no strict utility, yet the child enjoys them. And that is how the child is picking up that there are many activities in life which I can enjoy without there necessarily being a reason, without there being a utility. That applies to these activities also. So these activities like art and music and dancing and theatre, which are sometimes considered extracurricular, are in fact strictly curricular. They are a very important part of the education because as this child grows up with this appreciation that everything important need not be calculated or everything important cannot be counted. No. As the child picks this up, then the child is being prepared for life properly. Not only for life properly in terms of doing good, but also in terms of doing things which are great and worthwhile. Because again we saw in the last few sessions that nothing great or worthwhile happens in the world purely because of the intellect. The intellect may be an important instrument for doing great and worthwhile things, but then great and worthwhile things also involve difficulties, hardships and obstacles to be overcome. And the person has the strength and the courage to overcome all those only if the person is passionately involved in what the person is doing. So that passion to do something, that dedication to a cause, this is also emotion. So all vitality and enthusiasm, all commitment and passion, they come from the emotional part of the being, and that is what leads to all great and worthwhile activities in the world. And therefore anything which is preparing a foundation for that, anything which is making the child appreciate the importance of emotions is very important and a vital part of education. That is what the education of the vital is about. And the child can't be told all this, you will not be able to do anything great and worthwhile unless you take care of your emotions and so on and so forth. But you can do it the way the child would understand. The way the child understands is through these activities such as drawing, painting, art and music, and the message is getting internalized without the child being given a sermon on the importance of emotions. So that is where this education comes in. One of the occasions, some occasions on which these things happen is when festivals are celebrated, and that is why schools do celebrate festivals, and that goes beyond rituals or merrymaking. And not only they educate the emotional part of the being, they also create a feeling of togetherness. That is what makes them realize the joy of sharing happiness. So in fact, you cannot divorce this from what will come later, that is the psychic education. So in fact, one can build the psychic education into physical, vital as well as mental education. And in fact, that is how children learn, because when a child is say under 7, by and large the child learns through the body and to some extent through emotions. The intellectual development in a significant way starts only around the age of 10 to 12, and therefore the child is learning primarily through the body and the emotional part of the being. And that is why you might have seen that in primary school, in elementary school, when the child is around 5 years of age, there is a lot of movement associated with whatever the child is doing. Even a poem is recited with actions. Say one simple game is you stand in a circle and have something like a cushion or something, and the child is just passing on that cushion from one to the other. Now there's bodily movement involved, and along with that, as they are just repeating give and take and give and take from one to the other, give and take and give, something like that, give and take and give from one to the other, remember it so long as I live, or something like that. There are rhymes like that. So you make a rhyme out of it, and the child gradually starts then, sometime later, because it has been repeated so many times, that yes, so life is about give and take, and one can enjoy giving. So the child is sort of using the body, enjoying the game, and internalizing a message. So these things can't be really divorced. And that is what happens in festivals, while celebrating festivals also. And of course, they connect us to our roots. One of the major principles of Aurobindo is from the near to the far. And therefore, since the festivals in the local environment is what is familiar to the child, what is near to the child, that is the starting point. And from there we can go beyond what is immediate and around the child. And one way to increase the number of such festivals is to celebrate each child's birthday in the class. So each day can be a festival, because each day at least some or the other child will be having his or her birthday. Here are a few pictures and to show you how it is done in Mirambika Free Progress School. Here is Janmashtami, the birthday of Sri Krishna, being celebrated through a drama based on Sri Krishna's life. And here's another festival between a brother and a sister. The sister is tying rakhis on the brother's wrists. And here is a celebration of the Independence Day of India and Sri Aurobindo's birthday, which are on exactly the same day, and it's being celebrated through a dance, the Dandiya dance, which is a dance which originated in a state of India, Gujarat. So that is where this dance comes from. And then there are books which reinforce the same thing. This is the story of Sri Ram for 3 to 6 year old children, suitable for 3 to 6 year old children, and another one for children 6+. And this book has also been translated to Japanese by Midori, who was one of our students in the course on teaching yoga. Now coming to mental education. Of course, mental education involves to some extent development of memory, but even the way the memory is built up is not necessarily the right way. The right way is not mechanical repetition. The right way is to just use that knowledge repeatedly, not to mechanically repeat it just to commit it to memory. For example, if somebody asks us our name, we are able to tell it at once. But have we ever made any effort to remember our name? It's just because repeated use that we know it. Doctors remember the doses of drugs. and they don't have to remember them because they are prescribing those drugs every now and then, and through repetition they don't have to consult a book anymore to find out the dose. So that is the right way to develop memory, and it can be made interesting also. There are interesting ways of developing memory, but the important thing is that we should go beyond memory. That is extremely important. And what is it that is beyond memory, and why is it important? It is important because mechanical repetition even a parrot can do, and the parrot doesn't understand what the parrot is remembering. If we also don't understand it, then how will we be able to apply it? We can't apply knowledge that we don't understand, and pure repetition will not, being able to repeat doesn't necessarily guarantee understanding. Not only that, in fact, one can put the other way around, that unless we understand something, we will not be able to remember it properly. Because remembering also becomes easy only if we understand it. For example, try and think of a word which has some 8 or 10 letters, a pretty long word with 8 or 10 letters. We still remember its spelling quite easily. Why do we remember the spelling? Because it means something to us. On the other hand, try to think of a haphazard random collection of 8 or 10 letters put in an order that does not make a word. Try to remember that sequence of letters. It will be so difficult to remember that sequence. So a sequence of 10 letters which make a word is much easier to remember than just any sequence of any other randomly chosen 10 letters. The letters are the same, the number of letters is the same, and yet one is so much easier to remember than the other because one means something to us. So understanding is important. But then even that is not enough. One should be able to apply it in practice, and application goes beyond understanding because that requires that mental smartness, that mental flexibility to tweak that knowledge that we have a little to suit this particular situation. That is what every doctor is doing all the time. No patient conforms to the textbook description, and yet he is able to treat the patient because he is able to apply it in that situation, even by tweaking that knowledge a bit if necessary. So by seeing that similarity and then trying to use his mental flexibility to feel that yes, although this patient doesn't fit the textbook description, but this is what the patient possibly has, that he is able to make a diagnosis. So application goes one step beyond even understanding. Other important faculties of the intellect are being able to use language with clarity and precision, to be able to elaborate and summarize. Both are important. For example, a simple sentence in spirituality like one in all. Now, one in all often needs some elaboration for anybody to be able to understand. And at the same time, summarizing is also important because sometimes we have to summarize it. I am giving you this introduction to integral education over a period of about 1 hour. But then sometimes I am given only 15 minutes to do it, and still I am able to do it because one should be able to do it, and that is the art of summarizing. And that again has to be learnt. A parent, remarked once, my child can summarize a 10-minute child of 5. My 5-year-old can summarize a 10-minute story in 2 hours. Now that is not summary. And that is what the process of education is about. That instead of being able to summarize a 10-minute story in 2 hours, the child should be able to summarize a 2-hour story in 10 minutes. Then narrating and contextualizing. Now, an introduction to integral education for you who have been studying yoga for the last 1 month is different from the way it would be done to somebody who is attending a session on integral education for the first time. So how it is narrated and how the right context is built up is also important. Then looking at an issue from several angles, very important, because that is one of the important aspects of education, and that is a mental faculty, a faculty of the intellect. Otherwise what happens is we feel that my way of looking at something is the only way of looking at it, and that is what leads to so much intolerance in the world. Then analysis and synthesis. Both are important. We have to break sometimes things into bits to be able to understand them better. We're doing that all the time in science because we want to study, say, the factor of lifestyle on health. We break up lifestyle into things like exercise, and diet and smoking and drinking and sleep and so on, and we may like to study the individual contribution of each of these lifestyle factors. So analysis is important. But then synthesis is also important, because we should be also able to see how lifestyle as a whole affects health and disease. So analysis and synthesis both are important. Then curiosity and formulating a question. Curiosity there is in the child, that is inbuilt. So the first thing is we should not kill this curiosity in school. And whether that is guaranteed, one can't be very sure about. That's why it has been said that the schools in fact kill curiosity. Those with whom the schools fail become scientists. So curiosity is good, but then what we can do is not kill the curiosity, but nurture it so that the child learns to formulate a question properly. Because childish curiosity does not necessarily lead to a question that can be researched upon. Then originality and creativity. Leave enough time and provide enough of an enriched environment for these to develop. Then critical thinking. Very important, because we are being bombarded with all types of advertisements which have been created by people who are psychologists. Of course, not psychologists like Aditi. Psychologists who have decided to use their talents for brainwashing people into buying things that they don't need. So that is critical thinking. And I'll give a little pause here to discuss this a little more. About 30 years ago, in an Indian newspaper, there was an advertisement which looked a bit like this. There were small postage-sized pictures of a large number of boys and girls, and underneath was written the name of the child and the examination in which this child had done extremely well. And then along with that was written that all these children took the food supplement that was being advertised. Now, there will be a natural tendency to draw a certain conclusion from this advertisement, and the natural conclusion which most people will draw is that taking this food supplement improves academic performance. But then if we look at it critically, this conclusion is highly flawed. The reason being that here you have only a small sample of children, and only that sample of that type of a sample where children had both these characteristics. They did well in the exams and they also took the food supplement. And therefore, there are two things here. Firstly, all what the advertisement is claiming is an association between academic performance and taking the food supplement, and association by itself does not prove a cause and effect relationship. Secondly, the sample is very small and it's a biased sample. They have provided only that part of the sample. If one goes about without this type of bias and collects this type of data from a few thousand children, one will find that very large number of those children would not have taken this food supplement and still done extremely well in the exam. And you'll also find some children who took the supplement but did very poorly in the exam. And the overall correlation will be nil. There will be absolutely no relationship found between taking the food supplement and the academic performance. Now this requires critical thinking. And that again, therefore, becomes an important thing which the child should pick up, and it can be done by creating the right type of teaching material. For example, an advertisement like this, if it is discussed in the classroom, the children will see that how we should look at advertisement critically, and in general look at every issue critically instead of just accepting it on its face value. Another important faculty of the intellect is logical thinking, using reason properly. And again, I'll pause a little here with an example, because again this is extremely important. Aurobindo says about logical thinking there are three elements necessary for correct reasoning. First, the correctness of the facts or conclusions I start from. Secondly, the completeness as well as the accuracy of the data that I start from. Thirdly, the elimination of other possible or impossible conclusions from the same facts. So we process the facts through the process of reasoning. So that is processing. But that does not necessarily lead to just one conclusion. From the same data, we can often arrive at more than one conclusion, and we have to ponder over why we accept one and not the other conclusions. We end up generally accepting only one out of those possible conclusions. Now let's see it through an example. Suppose there is a boy, Ram, and he's told to deliver a parcel to Shyam, another boy. And the address, Shyam's address is provided. Ram comes back and says, Shyam was not at home. How do you know? He says the door was locked. Now, here the observation is Shyam's door was locked, and the conclusion is Shyam was not at home. So, just that much data, the door was locked, and the conclusion is Shyam was not at home. The teacher can ask, is Ram's conclusion right? And generally the children will come up with some answers, and the teacher can then guide the discussion in such a way that the children feel that the data is not enough or not accurate. That was one of the things Aurobindo had pointed out in that we should be sure that the data is accurate and complete. Now, accuracy of data. Was the door really locked? Because sometimes if there are doors in which you have a handle which can be turned up and down, and then there's a little keyhole through which you can put the key, and there's no padlock. So in such doors, you can't be very sure whether the door is really locked or the person has just locked it from inside or bolted it from inside. You can't be sure. So the data may not be accurate. So Ram thought that the door is locked, but the door might not have been locked. So is the data accurate? Firstly, we have to make sure of that. Even more important is the completeness of the data. Is the data complete? Now, if the children don't come up on their own, just ask them that, is there something else that we should try to find out before we conclude that Shyam is not at home? Then they'll tell you many things. For example, the house may have more than one doors. One door may be locked, but another may be open. So did the house have only one door? And were they all locked? That is what will make the data a little more complete. Anything else? If it was late in the evening, was there any light on inside the house? Any other thing? If it was hot, was any fan on which could be seen through the window? Anything else? Was there a doorbell? Did you try to ring the doorbell? Anything else? Did you try to call the person using your mobile phone? Anything else? Did you ask a neighbor whether this person is at home? Now, the more you collect, the more data you collect, the less incomplete it becomes, and that will help us in drawing the right conclusion or conclusions. Now, suppose all this data has been collected and everything points to Shyam not being at home. Is that the only conclusion that can be drawn from the data? Not necessarily, because Shyam may be inside the house, but he may be deep asleep, or he may be unconscious, or he may be dead. Now, in all these cases, the data will still point to Shyam not being at home. But why do we reject three conclusions and accept only one, that he was not at home? Because the others are unlikely. So it is purely probability which is guiding us to that. There is no reason for accepting one and not the other. So when we accept one conclusion out of the several that are possible, it is usually based either on probability, or based on our prejudice, or it is based on the current paradigm. That is the way of thinking that is fashionable in the time at the time and place that we are living. Now, these are the three primary reasons, and then the fourth reason why we may accept a conclusion and reject others is, if some conclusion is simple and another is complex, we have a tendency to select the simpler conclusion. So we try and select out of several possible conclusions the conclusion which is simple, or a conclusion which is more probable, or a conclusion which matches our prejudice, or a conclusion which matches the current fashionable way of thinking. Now, these are all absolutely irrational foundations for selecting, and yet they are the only ones that we have, and that is why we end up using one of these criteria. Better to use, at least try to avoid prejudice. That is one of the things that we have to avoid. And because there is no real rational reason why we select one conclusion and reject the others, in science, we never take any conclusion as final. Every conclusion is tentative. All scientific conclusions are tentative, and that is why statistically we express them as p is less than 0.05 or p is less than 0.01, which means that 95% or 99% chances are that this conclusion is correct, but still there is a 1% chance or 5% chance that this conclusion might have been the result of some chance factors or some factors which are not entirely valid. So that's why the conclusions always remain tentative in science. Okay, but still, are you still, if not 100% sure, are you quite sure that Shyam was not at home? Yes, quite sure we are. Say at the level of p is less than 0.05, we are sure to that extent. 95% chances are that Shyam is not actually at home. And then comes the anticlimax, which will make the class go into a laughter. They'll all laugh. Suppose Ram went to the wrong house because the address that he was provided was wrong. Now are you sure that Shyam was not at home? Now the whole thing collapses like a pack of cards. Now we are not sure. Where did we go wrong? We ignored the first item which Aurobindo had given. First, the correctness of the facts or the conclusions I start from. The starting point was Shyam's address. That itself was wrong. So if the first necessity is wrong, the first requirement is wrong, the first prerequisite is wrong, the rest is meaningless. So we started with a wrong fact. Shyam's address was not correct. Okay. So that is logical thinking. And the children don't have to be taught these three things the way Sri Aurobindo has stated. Sri Aurobindo himself says that this is not how children have to be taught. The children have to be taught through examples and stories. And they never have to be taught all this in school, not necessary. What is important is that they should internalize the process of correct reasoning. It's not necessary to remember the rules of logic. Committing to memory the rules of logic will not help. Internalizing the process of reasoning is what is important. Internalizing the process of correct reasoning. And why that is important, not only in education but also in life, is, as the mother has said here, for a very long time in life, it is indispensable that reason be the master. And why? Because it is the apex of ordinary human intelligence. This is the best developed part of the being that we have as compared to animals. This is the pride of the species. Organizing our life around the psychic being is still something way off. We have to work hard at it and still generally don't succeed fully. Hardly anybody succeeds fully in organizing life around the psychic being. But at least we can try and work towards organizing our life around the highest reaches of intelligence or reason. So that's why the mother says for a very long time in life. She doesn't say throughout life, all your life, but at least a very long time in life. Why not throughout life? Because eventually the psychic being should take over, which is not only something that provides us guidance, but also helps us overcome the limitations of the intelligence when it comes to knowledge. It can give us access to knowledge which is inaccessible to intelligence. So psychic being can do that also. But that is something that may or may not happen in a person's lifetime. In any case, it would happen very late, and therefore for a very long time in life, let reason be the master, let life be organized around reason, around the most refined and purified reasoning. So that's why educating a child in the correct use of reason is important, both for the child to become a good scientist and for the child to become a good human being. Now, psychic education. Of course, psychic education is not the fourth element in education: physical, vital, mental and psychic. In fact, that is the pivot. But all the same, for convenience, we are taking it up separately right now, and then we'll integrate it together again. Now, one might say that why does the soul need education? Psychic being is an aspect of the soul. Isn't the soul already perfect? It is important because the soul is perfect, but its voice has to be allowed to prevail. And that is what education is about. And why what makes it easier, what facilitates it is that the psychic being is linked to a reward and punishment system. Listening to the voice of the psychic being gives joy and lasting mental peace, in contrast with guilt and recurrent uneasiness which come from neglecting or ignoring the voice of the psychic being. And you've seen this story of this little girl Kavya, who picks up a hair clip which didn't belong to her, and in spite of having many reasons why she should keep the clip, she finds that it's very difficult for her to be at peace, and finally she decides to speak up and return the clip. But then what does the teacher do? She doesn't give her any punishment for having stolen the clip. She just asks her, how are you feeling all these days till you returned the clip and spoke up? She says, I was miserable. How are you feeling now? Now I feel as if a big burden is off my head. Now, what the teacher has done is taken the child through a reflection. The child herself now has said she was miserable all these days, so that was her punishment. And now the child is feeling very good because she has owned up, she has spoken up, and she is ready to return the clip. And that feeling of relief that she now has is her reward. So the teacher tells her, I'll give you no punishment, I'll give you no reward for having spoken up. Now, this is in keeping with a golden rule that the mother has given for education, applies both to teaching and parenting. A fault confessed must be forgiven. Because otherwise the child would feel, on one hand I have spoken the truth, and on the other hand I am being punished. If I had not told them, they would have never known. So I might as well have kept quiet. They would have never known that I did something wrong. So the fault confessed must be forgiven, but at the same time, what we should do is to take the child through that reflection the way that the teacher did, so that the child can understand that the wrong that I did make me uneasy, and now at least that I have done the right thing by confessing that why I did it. The relief that I am feeling, the peace that I have now, the peace of mind that I have got is the reward. Now, let's go over a few questions to reinforce some of the ideas that we have discussed. Is integral education the same as holistic education? Holistic sometimes by holistic sometimes we mean that not just education of the mind but also that of the body. So education of the body and the mind is sometimes considered holistic, but we have seen that that is not what integral education is about. We might say, well, okay, to clarify, we might say that integral education is holistic education plus value education. This may appear reasonable, but in fact it is not, because psychic education goes beyond value or moral education. And how does it go beyond value or moral education? In value or moral education, sometimes we feel that it is enough to tell the child what is right and wrong, give the child a set of do's and don'ts. But that we don't do in psychic education. We just make the child conscious of this inner voice, which will tell the child what the right thing to do is, which means that the child is not depending upon a given set of do's and don'ts which have been told to the child. The child is made aware of the fact that what is right and wrong, I know myself. It comes from within, and the child is also internalizing that it is in my own interest to listen to that voice, because that is how I can get peace of mind and avoid recurrent uneasiness. Why is it important to go beyond value or moral education? Now this is an important question, and therefore we'll go a little in detail. Firstly, value or moral education is like sermonizing. Do this, don't do this. Nobody likes sermonizing. Least of all, teenagers who need this education the most. Secondly, since the child always knows what is right and wrong, the child will have absolutely no difficulty in giving the right answers to what is right and wrong. So if we conduct an exam on moral or value education, the answers can be all right, but that doesn't guarantee that the child will actually practice them. Why? Because doing something wrong can be very tempting sometimes, as we have seen, and therefore the child may be overcome by that temptation and therefore may not do what is right. Thirdly, no ethical code has universal validity. No, ethical codes of necessity have got to be fixed. Do this and do that. But then no ethical code has universal validity. To give you an example, always speak the truth is a universal, is a code that is found in all ethical codes. Always speak the truth. Now, once a gunman entered an elementary school in the state of Connecticut in the US in December 2012, and he went about shooting a large number of children and teachers. In one of the classrooms where the children were very small, the teacher told the children to sit in the cupboards in the classroom, and she told them that when this man is gone, I'll take you out. So as soon as the children had been deposited in the cupboards and she had closed the cupboards, the gunman came to this very room and he asked the teacher, where are the children? She said, the children have gone to the gym. He shot her dead and moved on. Now later on the children were discovered in the cupboards, and they said that the teacher had told that I'll take you out when this man is gone. Now the teacher succeeded in saving the children, but what did she do just before being shot at? She told a lie. She knew the children are in the cupboard and she said the children have gone to the gym. Who told her that telling a lie is better than speaking the truth in this situation? Her psychic being, her inner voice. That is what told her that telling a lie is better than speaking the truth. Whereas any ethical code would say, always speak the truth. So that always is within quotes. There are situations where telling a lie may be better than speaking the truth. And that is why ethical codes have limitations. The no ethical code provides situation-specific guidance. Again, comes to something similar. The difference is that situation-specific, as we saw in the case of this teacher, universal can have another meaning also. Ethical codes are designed at a particular place at a particular time in history. And at that particular place, at that time, it may be appropriate, but with passage of time and change of place, some of the items may become inappropriate. So both these things put together give us the limitations of all ethical codes. No ethical code has universal validity, and no ethical code can build in to it situation-specific guidance. Then, ethical codes, moral codes, value education, they create the feeling in the child that I have to avoid doing anything wrong because otherwise I'll get some punishment. Who gives this punishment? It comes from outside. This is something important, and therefore again spend a little time here. This fear of external punishment coming from the teacher or the parent, is a very inadequate and important way of trying to inculcate moral or value education. Why? Because as the child grows up, the child realizes even more than as a child that if I commit a crime cleverly, nobody will ever find out, and therefore I'll not be punished. And that is why the criminal makes sure that he does it in such a way that the chances of being found out are minimal. But then what happens after he commits the crime? Generally he is not found out. That also is true. In fact, the amount of crime that is detected is only a very small fraction of the crime that is committed. And further, the crime that is punished is only a small fraction of the crime that is detected, which means most of the criminals in fact do go scot-free. And therefore the calculation of the criminal that I will not be found out and therefore I will not be punished works out. So if the only reason why a child should not, or a person should learn not to do anything wrong is external punishment, that is not enough of a deterrent. And moreover, the person is not even thinking in terms of external punishment, because most of the wrong things are done under a spell of emotions, when the thinking cap has been suspended for some time. When a boy rapes a girl, at that time he is not thinking of the consequences or the punishment that will come. He is under a spell of violent emotions, and that is why he does it. So fear of external punishment is not enough of a deterrent. However, what is happening in psychic education is that the child is becoming aware that if I do something wrong, then I feel guilty and I get recurrent uneasiness. Uneasiness that may go on for a very long time, and in some cases it may last a lifetime. It may return, the uneasiness may return even when the person is on the deathbed. So, if the child, in the process of going through school, somehow picks up this through various stories and examples and questions and reflections and so on, that I may be able to escape punishment from the teacher or the parent, but there is one punishment which comes from within, which nobody can escape, then the job has been done. So that is what psychic or moral education is about. It is not about inculcating fear of external punishment if the morals or values are violated. It is about a punishment which comes from within, which nobody can escape. But then how to do psychic education? First, let's see how not to do it. There's no rigid method of doing it. There's no separate period in the timetable for doing it, and there's no exam that needs to be conducted. The most important thing in psychic education is that the teacher is a role model, which means that the children learn more from what they find her doing rather than from what she says. This applies to teaching as well as parenting. Children learn from their observations on their teachers and parents rather than by what they are told to do. Then how to do it? Exploit situations, real life situations. If the teacher is conscious throughout that this is an important element in education, she'll be able to exploit those situations. For example, if a child has returned late from the sports period, she will not at once start scolding the child. She'll first ask the child why you are late. The child might be late because somebody got injured, some child got injured in the sports field, and this child had taken that child to the dispensary. So that would require and deserve some encouragement and appreciation rather than punishment or scolding. So before jumping to a conclusion that the child is late and therefore the child needs to be scolded, she should first try to find out why the child is late. Then the situation can be exploited properly, which means the teacher has to be patient, understanding, and all the time conscious of any time unexpectedly a situation presenting itself which becomes an opportunity for psychic education. Then tell stories, appropriate stories, ask the right type of questions, and take the children through appropriate reflection. Which means that to create those type of stories and material, other material, one has to work to create that material, and of course the material that has already created, to spot that, find that, and get that material. There's no end to this type of material that can be created. You've seen one story about that little girl. Here is another story. How many ice creams? 1 or 2? Now this is a boy who gets 10 rupees every day from his mother to get an ice cream. One day he tells his mother, today give me not 10 but 20 rupees. Instead of the usual orange bar that I buy, today I'll buy a chalk bar. So she gives him 20 rupees. When he reaches the ice cream vendor, he finds that a short distance away there is a poor boy standing. It's quite obvious that this boy also is feeling like having an ice cream, but he doesn't have the money. So this boy who has 20 rupees today, an impulse crosses his mind. Today I have 20 rupees. If I buy 2 ice creams of the same type that I buy every day, 2 10 rupee ice creams, then I can give one to this child and have one myself. And the story can be interrupted at this point while narrating to the children, and the children can be asked, if you were in the position of this boy, what would you do? Will you buy 1 ice cream or 2 ice creams? And I guarantee you, I can tell you from experience, the children will invariably say, I'll buy 2 ice creams. Then you can ask one of the children who says, I'll buy 2 ice creams. Are you sure you'll buy 2 ice creams? It's your money, you can spend it the way you like. The child will insist, no, I'll buy 2 ice creams. Now the child probably has said it to create an impression that I am a good boy. So you probe the child a little further. You ask the child, but won't you feel bad? You came prepared that I'll get a chalk bar today, but you're getting an orange bar. The child will say, doesn't matter, I'll still buy 2 ice creams. Then you ask the child, every day you buy orange bar, today you also you are buying orange bar. An orange bar is an orange bar. It may taste the same as every day, or it may taste less good than every day because today you are having this orange bar instead of the chalk bar. The child will say, no, on that day I'll like the orange bar more than usual. I like it even better than the chalk bar. Why? Because the child now has internalized, because I gave one to this boy. Then you tell him, okay, you are a good boy, you will buy 2 ice creams, but suppose you bought a chalk bar and walked away. You can do that. What would happen? The child will say, then I would have feel so bad eating it all alone. Now you see, the child has internalized both the messages. By saying that day the orange bar will taste better than usual, means that there's a joy in giving. No, suppose one orange bar has an X units of happiness. Now this day the child is experiencing not X but X plus Y units of happiness. Where did that additional Y units of happiness come from? It came from giving 1 ice cream to this other child. So it means there's a joy in giving. Then the child says, I'll feel bad eating the chalk bar alone. Again the child has internalized this message that if I had done something wrong, which means that I didn't listen to that initial impulse to buy 2 ice creams, that impulse came from the psychic being. If I didn't listen to that, I would feel guilty. So that message has been internalized. So after interrupting the story like that and making the children go through that type of a reflection, then the story can continue further. And what happens is, this boy also decided to buy 2 ice creams. He gave one to that child. Then this boy started walking home eating that orange bar. He's liking it more than usual, but then all the same he starts thinking of a few things. He thinks that suppose this boy comes and stands there every day, I will not be able to give him an ice cream every day. Then he says, I don't know what my mother would say. Then he feels that there are so many poor children in the world. I can't buy ice creams for all of them. But then he says that, but why didn't I think of all this before buying 2 ice creams? Then after a little reflection, he comes to the conclusion, it's good that I didn't think of all this before buying 2 ice creams. Otherwise, I would have felt so guilty having a chalk bar all alone. And finally he says, all these thoughts are not leading me anywhere. I did the right thing, and that's enough. Now what is happening is something that happens to all of us, including adults. It's not happening only to this child. When we do something right, the choice comes from the level of the psychic being. So we are at our peak consciousness. But we can't stay there all the time. What happens soon after that is that we start sliding down. We start sliding down to the mental level, to the level which calculates and which comes up with many reasons why that good deed should not have been done. And that is what is happening to this child also. Suppose that boy comes and stands there every day. I can't buy ice creams for all the children in the world. Why didn't I think of it earlier? Now these are all things which are coming from the intellect. He is now thinking at the level of the intellect. He is no longer at the level of the psychic being. This sliding down is important. Is also an important phenomenon. It's so common. And that's why it is said that if you decide to do something good, don't delay it. Otherwise you might change your mind. But then what is important is that finally the child did arrive at the conclusion that all these thoughts are leading me nowhere. Which means that thinking is not the solution. Thinking is not which will lead to maximum happiness. He returns to that maximum happiness, that joy, only when he suspends his thinking and says, all these thoughts are not leading me anywhere. I did the right thing, that's enough. And stops there. So of course, all children's stories should have a happy ending. So he comes back home and he tells his mother about it. His mother is very happy. She says that, I'm very happy to and lucky to have a son like you. And then she tells him, tomorrow I'll give you 40 rupees so that you can buy 2 chalk bars and give one to that boy if he's there. So there's no end to the type of material that can be created. which brings out these messages which psychic education is about without sermonizing. So, once again, to emphasize, the psychic being is not an additional element in integral education. It is the very pivot around which the education of the physical, vital, and mental revolve. Or to put it pictorially, the psychic is right at the center, and the education of the body and the mind revolve around it. And when you talk the mind, the emotions don't have to be neglected. They are very important, and their education is strictly curricular. And when it comes to the mental, we have to go much beyond the mind, much beyond the intellect, and particularly take care of critical thinking and logical thinking. So, yoga is education, and just as yoga is incomplete without spirituality, education is also incomplete without spirituality. In fact, yoga is nothing but spirituality in practice. Spirituality brought into daily life is what yoga is about. So, if spirituality were to be considered science, yoga is technology. That is the relationship between spirituality and yoga. So, yoga is education. Education is incomplete without spirituality, and spirituality in practice is yoga. Suggested reading. There's a book which is a compilation of some of the selected writings of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother on education. The title itself is Sri Aurobindo and the Mother on Education. It has been published by Sri Aurobindo Ashram Pondicherry. It's a treasure. Anybody who made that selection has made an excellent selection in this compilation. In just about 150 words, one has a gold mine. Here is another book which is more like a textbook, more oriented to a classroom and parenting, The Philosophy and Practice of Integral Education, a handbook for teachers and parents. Again published by Sri Aurobindo Ashram, Delhi branch. And another one on psychic education, workbook, very practical again, based on the writings of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, again published by Sri Aurobindo Ashram, Delhi branch. And this is the ashram where I live and work, and which has brought out many of the publications that you saw today. Thank you all.
Alright, since there are no more questions, we come to the end of today's session. Thank you everyone for your messages in the chat box. Tomorrow we will have another guest speaker with us, and the topic will be evolutionary parenting given by Dr. David Marshik. And today we end with the meditation music. Thank you once again.
कौन लगन में नील गगन में चली चांद की नैया, देखो चली चांद की नैया। कौन लगन में नील गगन में चली चांद की नैया, पतवार दिखे ना पार दिखे ना, दिखे नहीं खेवैया। ओ नैया के खेवनहार, करुणा कर आना इस पार। ओ नैया के खेवनहार, करुणा कर आना इस पार। बिना तुम्हारे नैन हमारे तरसे हृदय बसैया, देखो चली चाँद की नैया। कौन लगन में नील गगन में चली चाँद की नैया, देखो चली चाँद की नैया। हम भी बंधन तोड़ चुके, कुल जग से मोह मोड़ चुके। हम भी बंधन तोड़ चुके, कुल जग से मोह मोड़ चुके। छूटी छाया लौक पाया, मिला है जगत रखैया, देखो चली चाँद की नैया। कौन लगन में नील गगन में चली चाँद की नैया, देखो चली चाँद की नैया। जो उज्ज्वल की काली रात, आवो मन में बन पर भात। बसती तारों से मतवारों में ले आवो नैया, देखो चली चाँद की नैया। कौन लगन में नील गगन में चली चाँद की नैया, देखो चली चाँद की नैया। देखो चली चाँद की नैया, देखो चली चाँद की नैया। देखो चली चाँद की नैया, देखो चली चाँद की नैया।